Then we come to a maybe paradoxical concept. Can there be a rate of sustainable pollution? And yes, if we pollute from the use of our resources, there are byproducts coming out of the way we combust fossil fuels and when we use chemicals in making plastics and all kinds of things. And for that pollution to be sustainable over time, it means that the rate of emission can be no greater than the rate at which that pollutant can be recycled, absorbed, and rendered harmless in the things, in the environmental media into which you release it, or where it's ultimately moving. Because, if you release a pollutant, it doesn't stay where you put it. It usually moves around and kind of spreads all throughout the whole system. So, is our pattern of growth that we talked about in the early part, is it threatening the sustainability? Well, I would say undoubtedly yes. At the moment it surely is, and you can use whatever denial techniques you want, but I will show with some illustrations that yes, there is a conflict between growth and sustainability at the moment. If we look at the various media we have, land, we're degrading a very finite resource, land. We don't have more than we have, and we're degrading it in many ways. We're putting chemicals in it. We have 2 million contaminated sites in Europe alone. We are taking nutrients out of it and not giving it back, etc. So we are really playing havoc with our land source. Water. We use a huge part of the accessible fresh water already. We're exhausting the groundwater at levels that we're not being replenished. As a result, billions of people will be living very shortly, many already are, in areas with water shortage and stress. Many rivers do not reach the sea anymore, and we're destroying land from using too much water in agriculture in the wrong way. And if we go to the air, we have local and regional air pollution. Lots of, acronyms here, chemical substances that we put out in the atmosphere that really reduces the air quality and that really causes human health problems of really huge dimensions and death. 2.4 million people die every year from particle air pollution.
2.4 million?
Yeah. And that includes quite a lot of women and children who are affected by indoor air pollution from cooking from stoves in developing countries, plus local and urban air pollution all around the world. Then we have global air pollution. We have the ozone layer that we have been depleting. We are addressing that, but it's still going to take 50, 60 years before we have it back to the level where we need it to be to protect ourselves from the sun's rays. And it was really very close. If the chemist had used just another sister type of compounds to the ones that we were using for fridges in the beginning, we could have destroyed the ozone layer completely before we even had the science to discover it was there. When it comes to climate change, the science predictions is that somewhere between 1 to 6 degrees of warming will happen in this century, depending on our actions and some uncertainty in the models. It's already happening, and sea level rise as well. This is the average temperature increase at the last decade of the century that will happen on an average between the scenarios that have been produced. So from 0 to over 7 degrees. And you can
highest of the...
Yeah. And you can imagine what that means for melting the ice. Well, I don't know if there is an up and down. And then we come to life itself, the species that inhabit this planet together with us. And extinction rates are increasing. And this is the first great extinction event caused by the activities of one single biological species. And this is going to increase dramatically with only 2 degrees warming in a few decades. And it's rather likely we will reach 2 degrees warming, considering how difficult it is for governments to even aim for that. So, as a conclusion, from the changes in the land, in the air, and in the water, we have something that we can be calling global environmental change, and this is much more than climate change. According to one of the international science programs, the most well-respected one, they say that the Earth is currently operating in a no-analog state, in a state it has never operated on before. In terms of key environmental parameters, the Earth system has recently moved well outside of the range of the natural variability exhibited over at least the last 500,000 years. The nature of changes now occurring simultaneously in the Earth system, their magnitudes and the rates of change are unprecedented. And to then translate that into economic language in the balance sheet of the company of the planet, you can talk about the ecosystem services that this planet provides for us, for our economies and for our human well-being, that we are depending on, that every company, every person, every country depends on. And a worldwide scientific report released a couple of years ago concluded that the bottom line is that 60% of the ecosystem services that nature provides are degraded. So, what's the conclusion? I would say growth and sustainability are in conflict now with these illustrations, and I could go on, of course, for hours giving more data, and I'll give you a page with websites where you can, go further into details and get numbers and all these things. But then I would also argue that they could be in less conflict if producers and consumers, like we in this room, if we changed our time and scale horizons. I'll go into that in a minute. And then finally that actually there wouldn't have to be a real conflict if we redefine the concept of growth itself. So let's look at changing, reducing the conflict a bit, and you could reduce it quite dramatically. If you change the time and scale horizons of our societies, of our individual choices, and of our company choices. Now, the traditional short-term horizons doesn't work for sustainability. So a way to extend those, to really value the future, so that the future is valued just the way it is now, that really changes the whole economic accounting system. And one example of that is, you may have heard of the Stern report on climate change, where an economist calculated the cost of addressing climate change, of avoiding climate change. What would it cost for the whole planet to kind of get the whole energy system changing and all the investments that we need to avoid dangerous climate change? And then he compared that with the cost of what would it cost to adapt to climate change. And the conclusion, which really helped to stir much higher political will around the world, I think, was that it's cheaper, it's definitely cheaper to avoid climate change. Well, the way that he reached those figures, I've been told, I haven't read the report, I must confess, is that he used a zero discount rate. You cannot reach that figure if you value the present more, as most economic calculations do, and that's why also, mainstream economists were criticizing him